My sister outed me to our parents, but she had secrets of her own for me to expose. I was video calling my brother Logan about coming home for Easter break when he said something that made my blood run cold. Our sister Grace had gotten into a massive fight with our parents about dropping out of nursing school, and when Dad threatened to cut her off, she'd blurted out that at least she wasn't hiding being gay like I was. She showed them photos from my private Instagram and told them I'd been recruiting our youngest sister Anna to the lifestyle. She told them I'd been laughing at their beliefs behind their backs and that she'd tried to protect them from knowing what their daughter really was. Mom cried while Dad locked himself in his office, and Grace spent the next hour comforting Mom and positioning herself as the good daughter. I drove home immediately and went straight to Logan's house. Anna was there too, crying because Grace had been telling Mom she found gay content on Anna's phone, suggesting I'd corrupted her too. My brother told me Grace was already working on getting power of attorney over our grandmother's estate by convincing everyone I couldn't be trusted with family matters anymore. We realized Grace had been doing this for years, like when she blamed Anna for getting pregnant in high school when really Grace needed abortion money, or when she said Logan stole from the church fundraiser when Grace took the cash for spring break. Then Logan showed me Grace's Instagram proving she'd been lying about nursing school for the entire semester, posting pictures in scrubs she never wore to clinicals that didn't exist while our parents paid $30,000 in tuition for classes she wasn't attending. Anna found Grace's Venmo history showing she'd spent the tuition on concerts and Miami trips while sending our parents fake grade reports she'd made in Photoshop. Logan's girlfriend who worked at the registrar's office confirmed Grace was expelled for paying someone to take her anatomy exam 2 months ago, not voluntarily dropping out like she'd claimed. We found emails where Grace was trying to get loans using our parents' information without their knowledge, already approved for $50,000 that would post next week. Grace had been bragging to friends about destroying my relationship with our parents, calling me a self-righteous bitch who deserved to be disowned and saying she'd make sure I never saw inheritance money. She'd actually researched whether sexual orientation could be used to contest wills in our state and was disappointed when she found out it couldn't. We discovered she'd been intercepting mail to hide credit card statements showing she'd been using Mom's emergency card for thousands in purchases at designer stores. We found forged checks from Dad's business account, stolen credit card statements, and proof Grace had been selling our dead grandfather's belongings on Marketplace while telling our parents she was organizing his estate. She'd made $20,000 selling his watch collection and war memorabilia that was supposed to stay in the family forever. My brother found text messages where Grace was negotiating to sell Grandma's jewelry while she was still alive in hospice, telling buyers she'd have the pieces soon. We compiled everything into a folder 3 inches thick showing 3 years of systematic lies and fraud. Grace had been texting the family group chat about praying for my soul and suggesting conversion therapy programs, even sending links to camps that did electroshock therapy with comments about extreme cases needing extreme solutions. She'd convinced our parents to invite their pastor and his wife to Sunday dinner for spiritual support, knowing it would be even more humiliating for me. Sunday dinner arrived with the pastor and his wife sitting next to my parents, everyone looking at me like I was diseased while Grace wore a cross necklace I'd never seen before. Mom had made me wait on the porch for 5 minutes before letting me enter what she now called God's house. Grace had printed Bible verses about homosexuality and placed them at my seat, highlighted in pink marker. Mom started her speech about how disappointed she was and how I'd destroyed their reputation at church and in the community, while the pastor added scripture quotes between her sentences. Grace kept interjecting about trying to guide me, even claiming she'd caught me trying to convert Anna, which made Anna grip my hand under the table so hard her nails dug into my palm. Dad wouldn't look at me while Mom went on about bringing shame to our family name and destroying everything they'd built. The pastor started praying over me without asking, putting his hand on my head while Grace smirked behind her prayer hands. Mom was building up to kicking me out or demanding conversion therapy, but I stood up, the folder heavy in my hands, and placed it on the table with a thud that made the water glasses shake. Grace's smirk faltered for just a second before returning, and she started to say something about respecting prayer time. Before anyone says another word about my soul or my choices, you need to know the truth about Grace. The pastor's wife gasped at my interruption, but I kept going, my hand on the folder's cover. Everything she's told you is a lie, starting with nursing school. Grace went pale as I started to open the folder, and Mom said my name in warning, but I looked directly at Grace. Should we start with the teen pregnancy or the forged checks? Grace's face went completely white as I pulled the first paper from the folder. My fingers found the official letter from the college registrar, and I held it up so everyone could see the school's letterhead. The paper made a soft rustling sound in the sudden quiet of the dining room. Mom reached across the table for it while Dad's jaw got tight, and the pastor's hand froze halfway through his prayer gesture. I let Mom take the letter and watched her eyes move across the words that confirmed Grace had been kicked out 2 months ago for paying another student to take her anatomy exam. Grace lunged forward and tried to grab the paper from Mom's hands. Her chair scraped against the floor as she stood up too fast. The pastor's wife shifted in her seat and looked at her husband with wide eyes. Grace's voice got high and desperate as she said the letter was fake, and that I was trying to destroy our family because I was angry about being called out. Her hands shook as she kept reaching for the paper, but Mom pulled it away. I stayed calm and pulled out the next stack of papers from the folder. These were printouts from Grace's Instagram showing her in scrubs she bought online, but never wore to the clinical rotations that didn't exist. Each photo had timestamps showing she posted them during class hours she was supposed to be attending. Dad picked up the papers with hands that trembled slightly. His reading glasses reflected the dining room light as he studied each image. Grace's voice got louder as she insisted someone must have hacked her account and posted fake pictures. She kept looking between Mom and Dad like she was trying to figure out who to convince first. Anna cleared her throat and everyone turned to look at her. Her voice came out small, but steady as she told everyone about the pregnancy scare in high school that Grace blamed on her. She explained how Grace needed money for an abortion, but made Anna take the blame when their parents found the pregnancy test. Mom's face crumbled as she looked back and forth between her daughters. Grace immediately pointed at Anna and called her a liar. She said I'd been manipulating Anna and filling her head with lies to turn the family against her. Anna's hand found mine under the table again and squeezed hard. I reached deeper into the folder and pulled out the Venmo transaction history we'd printed. The papers showed $30,000 meant for tuition spent on Miami trips and concert tickets and designer clothes over just one semester. Each transaction had descriptions like Spring Break Miami and Coachella tickets. Right next to the dates, Mom and Dad wrote tuition checks. The pastor cleared his throat and suggested maybe we should handle this as a private family matter. I kept going and spread more papers across the table. Dad finally looked directly at Grace and asked if she'd been attending nursing school at all this semester. His voice was quiet, but there was something dangerous in it that made everyone go still. Grace's eyes filled with tears that seemed to appear on command. She pressed her hands to her face and said everyone was ganging up on her. She tried to move toward Mom for comfort, but Mom stayed frozen in her chair staring at the evidence covering our Sunday dinner table. Logan pulled out his phone and turned the screen toward Dad. The screenshots showed Grace's messages to her friends where she bragged about destroying me. She'd called me awful names and celebrated that I'd be kicked out and disowned. She'd actually written that she couldn't wait to see me homeless while she got all the inheritance money. The pastor's wife leaned toward her husband and whispered something about needing to leave. He shook his head slightly and told her they should stay as witnesses. I took a deep breath and looked at everyone around the table. I told them I was gay, and I wasn't ashamed of who I was. I said using my identity as a weapon wouldn't make Grace's crimes disappear. The room went completely silent except for Grace muttering that I was trying to change the subject from my perversion. She kept using that word over and over like it might distract from the evidence in front of everyone. I reached for the most damning papers in the folder. The forged checks from Dad's business account came out one by one. Each check showed Grace's attempts to copy his signature with varying degrees of success. Some were obvious forgeries, while others were close enough that the bank had cashed them. Dad's face went from confused to furious as he recognized transaction amounts he never authorized. He pulled out his phone immediately and started dialing the bank's fraud department number he apparently knew by heart. His voice was sharp as he told them he needed to report multiple cases of check fraud on his business account. Grace started backing toward the dining room door, but Logan stood up and blocked her path. Mom finally found her voice and asked Grace how she could do this to the family. Her words came out broken like she could barely get them past her throat. Grace's whole body was shaking now, but she kept insisting everything was fake. She said I must have forged all of it because I was bitter about being exposed. She claimed I had computer skills and could have made any of these documents. She even suggested I'd hacked into her social media and planted evidence. No one was buying it anymore, and she knew it. The papers spread across the table told a story that was too detailed and consistent to be fake. 3 years of lies and theft documented in black and white that no amount of tears or accusations could erase. I pulled out the credit card statements next, the ones Grace had been hiding by grabbing the mail before Mom could see it. The papers made a soft sliding sound as I spread them across the table between the water glasses and bread basket. Mom picked up the first statement and her eyes went wide as she saw charge after charge she never made. There was a $2,000 handbag from Nordstrom just last month that made her hand shake. She kept reading down the list and found more purchases at stores she'd never even been to. Dad grabbed another statement and started adding up the amounts on his phone calculator. His face got redder with each number he typed in. Grace tried to grab the papers from Mom's hands, but Logan caught her wrist and held it. The pastor cleared his throat and said, "Maybe we should all pray about this difficult situation." Dad cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Prayer won't fix fraud and theft," he said while already dialing the bank's number. Grace started backing toward the dining room door while Dad talked to someone about suspicious activity on multiple accounts. Anna suddenly stood up and her chair scraped against the floor. She told everyone how Grace had been going through her phone for weeks. Grace had found some posts Anna liked about Pride Month and threatened to tell Mom she was gay too. Anna's voice got stronger as she explained how Grace demanded money from her part-time job at the bookstore. Every week, Grace would take half of Anna's paycheck, or she'd show Mom the screenshots. Logan put his arm around Anna's shoulders while Grace started denying everything. First she said Anna was lying, then she said Anna offered her the money, then she claimed it was a loan. Her story kept changing every few seconds and everyone could see it. I reached back into the folder for the papers that would hurt the most. The marketplace screenshots came out slowly, and I placed them in front of Dad. His breathing stopped when he saw grandfather's purple heart listed as sold for $800. The next page showed his entire watch collection gone for $20,000 total. Dad stood up so fast his chair crashed backward onto the floor. His fists clenched, and for a second I really thought he might hit Grace. She must have thought so too because she ran for the door. Logan was already there, blocking her path with his arms crossed. "You need to face what you've done," he told her. Grace started screaming that we were all jealous of her success. She called herself the only good child in this sick family. The pastor and his wife stood up quietly and gathered their things. The pastor said this was clearly a family matter that needed legal attention, not spiritual guidance. His wife wouldn't look at anyone as they walked toward the front door. I heard her whisper to him that they should have never gotten involved in this mess. Dad's voice got louder as he demanded Grace's phone and laptop immediately. He needed to see what else she'd been hiding from the family. Grace shook her head and tried to run past Logan toward the stairs. Mom's voice stopped her cold with just one word that echoed through the room. "Enough." Grace froze on the third step and slowly turned around. Mom told her to sit down and explain the $50,000 loan applications we'd found, the ones using their social security numbers without permission. Grace's face went from red and angry to white and scared. She realized we had access to her email account and knew about everything. Her legs seemed weak as she walked back to the dining room table. She sat down hard in her chair and stared at the evidence spread everywhere. I explained how Logan's girlfriend at the registrar's office had helped us learn the truth. Grace had been expelled 2 months ago, not last week like she claimed. She'd paid another student $500 to take her anatomy exam for her. The school found out and kicked her out immediately with no chance to return. Every tuition check our parents wrote after that had been cashed by Grace. She'd been keeping the money while pretending to go to classes that didn't exist. Mom started crying again, but these tears seemed different, more angry than sad. Dad was still on the phone with the bank and writing down case numbers. Grace tried one more time to manipulate everyone by falling to her knees. She sobbed about the pressure of being the perfect daughter and how hard it was. Nobody moved to comfort her, and her crying got more desperate. Dad pulled out his phone again and started dialing a different number. "Whitney Maddox, please," he said to someone. "Tell her it's about a family emergency involving fraud." He put the phone on speaker and set it on the table. Whitney's voice came through clear and professional as Dad explained what we'd discovered. She listened without interrupting until he finished describing the forged checks and stolen money. "You need to file a police report immediately," Whitney said. "Tonight, if possible." She also told us to freeze every bank account and credit card right away before Grace could drain them, which made Grace jump up from her chair so fast she knocked over Mom's water glass. Grace started begging Mom not to call the police, saying she'd pay everything back somehow, but when Dad asked her exactly how she planned to do that without a job or degree, she just kept repeating that she'd figure it out. Logan cleared his throat and dropped another bomb by telling everyone he'd already called the hospice that morning where Grandma was staying because he'd been worried about Grace trying to get power of attorney. The administrator had confirmed that someone matching Grace's description came by yesterday asking about jewelry and estate documents, claiming to be handling family affairs, but they'd turned her away since she wasn't on the approved visitor list. Grace's face went from pale to bright red as she screamed that Logan was lying, but he pulled up the email confirmation on his phone showing the administrator's response with the security footage timestamp. Anna suddenly stood up and walked over to Mom with her phone, showing her screenshot after screenshot of texts Grace had been sending her for weeks. Mom's hands shook as she read Grace threatening to out Anna to their youth group, sending her links to conversion therapy camps, and telling her she'd make sure everyone at church knew Anna was gay if she didn't give Grace money from her part-time job at the mall. Tears ran down Mom's face as she kept scrolling, seeing message after message where Grace called Anna disgusting and said she'd destroy her life just like she was destroying mine. Grace tried to grab the phone from Mom, but Dad blocked her, and that's when Grace played her last desperate card by putting her hand on her stomach and announcing she was pregnant and needed the money for her baby. Anna actually laughed out loud and immediately pulled up Grace's Instagram from last week, showing everyone videos of Grace doing shots at a club downtown, dancing on tables with a drink in each hand, and posting about being hungover the next morning. Grace tried to say those were old videos, but Anna showed the date stamps from 5 days ago, plus Grace's Snapchat story from yesterday, where she was drinking wine at brunch. Dad's phone started ringing and he stepped away to answer it, coming back a few minutes later with his jaw clenched tight. The bank had frozen all their accounts after detecting irregular activity going back 6 months, and the manager needed them to come in first thing tomorrow morning to review security camera footage of ATM withdrawals they didn't recognize. Grace suddenly lunged across the table trying to grab the evidence folder, sending plates crashing to the floor and red wine splashing across Mom's white tablecloth. Logan had to physically hold her back while she screamed that we were ruining her life, and she'd tell everyone at church that I'd converted Anna and destroyed the family with my sick lifestyle. I stood up and looked Grace straight in the eye, telling her that her threats didn't scare me anymore, because the truth about her crimes would come out no matter what lies she spread about my sexuality. She actually spit at me, but it landed on the table instead, and that's when Mom finally snapped and told Grace to get out of the house immediately. Grace demanded to know where she was supposed to go since we'd destroyed everything, and Dad told her in the coldest voice I'd ever heard that she should have thought about that before she stole from her own family. He gave her exactly 1 hour to pack her essential items before they changed all the locks, and if she took anything that wasn't hers, they'd add it to the police report. Grace stormed upstairs screaming and crying, slamming her door so hard that a picture fell off the hallway wall. Mom collapsed into her chair and kept asking how they'd missed all the warning signs, how their daughter could do this to them. I sat down next to her and explained how Grace had been playing everyone against each other for years, making each of us think we were the problem while she was the victim, using their trust and religious faith as weapons to hide her crimes. Mom grabbed my hand and squeezed it, the first real contact we'd had since Grace outed me, and I could feel her whole body shaking. Logan was already on the phone with the police non-emergency line, calmly explaining the fraud situation and asking what documentation they'd need for a formal report. Anna had her laptop out and was making a spreadsheet of all the relationships Grace had damaged with her lies over the years, including friends she'd turned against each other and family members who no longer spoke because of stories Grace had spread. Dad was in his office on the phone with credit card companies, his business voice steady even though I could see his hands trembling as he wrote down case numbers and dispute claim information. We could hear Grace upstairs throwing things around and screaming on her phone to someone about how her psycho family was kicking her out for no reason. Whitney stayed on speaker the whole time, walking us through each step we needed to take to protect ourselves legally and financially from any further damage Grace might try to cause. 20 minutes later, Grace came stomping down the stairs, dragging 2 huge suitcases behind her. Her face was red and puffy from crying, but her eyes looked wild and dangerous. She dropped the suitcases by the door and turned to face all of us. She said if we called the police, she'd kill herself and it would be our fault. Whitney's voice came through the phone speaker, immediately telling us this was classic manipulation. She said if we thought Grace was really suicidal, we should call 911 right now. Grace's face went even redder when she heard that. She started screaming that I'd destroyed the whole family with my sick lifestyle. She said God would punish me for being gay and turning Anna against them too. Her words didn't hurt anymore now that everyone knew what she really was. She grabbed the door handle and yanked it open so hard it slammed into the wall. A picture fell off the wall and crashed to the floor. It was her high school graduation photo, which made Logan actually laugh. She stormed out dragging her suitcases, and we heard her car peel out of the driveway. The next morning, Dad drove us all to the police station to meet with Detective Eliza Groves. She was a tall woman with gray hair who took our folder of evidence and started going through it page by page. She said Grace's pattern of fraud could mean multiple felony charges. She asked us questions for 2 hours and took copies of everything we had. While we were there, Dad got a call from his accountant about something weird on his business credit report. There was a luxury apartment downtown that had been rented using his business credit card 3 months ago. The address was where Grace claimed she'd been going for study groups all semester. The lease was in Dad's name, which meant he was responsible for $12,000 in back rent. Detective Groves added this to her notes and said it showed planning and intent. We went straight from the police station to the bank where Dad had his business accounts. The manager took us to a back office and pulled up security footage on his computer. There was Grace at the ATM wearing huge sunglasses and a baseball hat trying to hide her face. She was withdrawing the daily maximum from Dad's business account over and over. The manager helped us file fraud reports for every transaction. He said having a police report would help them reverse the charges and maybe get some money back. We were just leaving the bank when Whitney called with really bad news. The $50,000 loan Grace applied for using our parents' information had been approved yesterday. It would post to their account tomorrow morning unless we stopped it right now. Dad spent the next 3 hours on the phone with the loan company trying to prove it was identity theft. He had to send them copies of the police report and sign a bunch of forms saying he never applied for any loan. They finally agreed to cancel it but said it would hurt his credit score anyway. That evening, our phones started going crazy with texts from Grace. She'd send long apologies saying she was sorry and just needed help. Then 5 minutes later, she'd send threats saying she'd ruin our lives if we didn't drop the charges. She posted on Facebook that our parents kicked her out for trying to save me from sin. She said they chose their gay daughter over their straight one who was just trying to help. Most people who knew our family could tell something was off about her story, though. Anna couldn't take all the drama and asked Logan if she could stay at his place for a few days. They spent the evening calling people who'd bought Grandpa's stuff on Marketplace. Logan explained that the items were stolen and asked if they'd consider returning them. One old man who'd bought Grandpa's purple heart was really upset when he found out. He said he'd bought it thinking the family needed money for medical bills because that's what Grace told him. He agreed to mail it back to us for free and even apologized for buying it. Mom spent most of the day in her room crying and praying. She kept asking me if she'd failed as a mother and what she did wrong with Grace. I sat with her and reminded her that Grace made these choices all by herself. Mom held my hand while she cried, which was more contact than we'd had in months. She said she didn't understand how Grace could lie for so long about so many things. I told her Grace had been doing this since we were kids but got better at hiding it. Mom said she felt stupid for not seeing it, but I told her Grace fooled all of us. She asked if I thought Grace would really hurt herself, and I said Grace only cared about herself too much for that. The next morning, Detective Groves called with more bad news about Grace. They'd found applications for credit cards in Anna's name that Grace had submitted last week. The applications got rejected because Anna was too young, but it showed Grace was getting desperate. Detective Groves said this was another felony charge for attempted identity theft of a minor. She asked if Anna would come in to make a statement about it. Dad's hands were shaking when he hung up the phone. Anna came downstairs looking pale and asked if we could go to Whitney's office right away since Grace had shown up at her school that morning. She'd been waiting by Anna's car in the parking lot and started following her toward the main building. Anna said Grace kept grabbing her arm and telling her she needed to tell the police she was confused about everything. The school security guard saw Grace getting aggressive and had to physically pull her away from Anna. Whitney's assistant Jeremy met us at the office within an hour and started filling out the restraining order paperwork while Anna's hands shook. He said the school incident would help our case since there were witnesses and security footage. Anna had to write down everything Grace said to her, including the threats about ruining her college applications if she didn't help. Jeremy filed the emergency order that afternoon and told us it would be served to Grace within 24 hours. 2 days later, Whitney called to tell us Grace had been fired from her job at the mall. The manager had noticed inventory problems and checked the security cameras from the past 3 months. They caught Grace processing fake returns and putting the cash directly in her pocket instead of the register. The manager wanted to press charges, which would add another felony to Grace's growing list. Whitney said this helped our case because it showed a pattern of theft from multiple sources. Dad spent the next morning at his accountant's office going through every business transaction from the past year. They found forged checks totaling $28,000 plus another $12,000 in unauthorized credit card charges. The accountant said insurance might cover about half the losses, but Dad would have to eat the rest. Dad's face looked gray when he came home, and he had to take his blood pressure medication twice that day. That evening, the church elder called and Dad put him on speaker, so Mom could hear too. The elder said people were talking about our family situation, and it was causing division in the congregation. He suggested we take a break from all leadership positions until things settled down. Dad just said okay, and hung up without arguing, which showed how tired he was. Mom started crying again and went to her room without eating dinner. My phone buzzed with a message from someone I didn't recognize who turned out to be Grace's friend from college. She said Grace had been telling everyone I planted all the evidence because I was jealous of her success. The friend said she stopped believing Grace after seeing the police report that someone posted online. She wanted me to know Grace was also lying about having a job at a law firm, when really she'd been unemployed for months. She sent me screenshots of Grace's messages claiming our whole family was homophobic, and that's why she had to protect herself. I forwarded everything to Whitney, who said it would help show Grace's pattern of lying. The next afternoon, we got a frantic call from the hospice where Grandma was staying. Someone had tried to get into her room after visiting hours claiming to be her granddaughter with a family emergency. The person matched Grace's description and had tried to convince the night nurse she needed to get jewelry for a funeral. Security turned her away, but not before she caused a scene in the lobby. We had to add extra security restrictions and give them a list of approved visitors. Logan was so angry he punched a hole in his apartment wall and had to ice his knuckles. Mom finally sat down with me 3 days later while Dad was at another meeting with lawyers. She said she'd been thinking about everything and realized Grace's betrayal was worse than anything else. She told me she needed time to understand my sexuality, but that she saw now what real harm looked like. She held my hand and said Grace had shown her the difference between disagreement and destruction. It wasn't full acceptance, but it was the first time she'd touched me willingly since finding out. She asked if I'd always known, and I told her since middle school. She nodded and said she wished I'd felt safe enough to tell her sooner. The following week, Detective Groves called to say they were bringing Grace in for formal questioning. Grace showed up at the station with a public defender who told her not to say anything. Detective Groves said Grace demanding a lawyer immediately made her look guilty to everyone. They had to release her but ordered her not to contact any family members. Grace violated that order within 2 hours by calling Mom from a blocked number. Mom hung up and called Detective Groves right away to report it. Meanwhile, Logan had been going through old emails and found something terrifying. Grace had been posting our information on sketchy websites that buy personal data. She'd listed all our social security numbers, Mom's maiden name, and even our old addresses. Logan found at least 3 sites where she'd sold our information for quick cash. We all had to freeze our credit immediately and change every password we'd ever used. The credit monitoring service found 4 attempts to open new accounts in my name just that week. Logan's girlfriend helped us set up identity theft protection, but said the damage might follow us for years. 2 weeks after everything exploded, Dad got a call from an older man who'd bought some of Grandpa's watches on Marketplace. The man said he'd been thinking about it and wanted to do the right thing. He offered to sell them back to us for exactly what he'd paid Grace, no profit. Dad met him at a coffee shop and came back with 6 of the 12 watches, including Grandpa's favorite one from the war. Dad cried holding that watch and said it felt like getting a piece of his father back. The man apologized for buying them and said he should have known something was wrong when Grace seemed so desperate. Dad thanked him and said not everyone would have been so honest about returning them. 3 days later, Anna came to my apartment with an envelope she'd found in her backpack after school. Her hands shook as she handed it to me, and I recognized Grace's handwriting immediately with Bible verses about family loyalty and forgiveness, covering both sides of the paper. Anna had already called Detective Groves, who arrived within an hour to collect the letter as evidence of Grace violating the restraining order. The detective took photos of everything and told us Grace had been warned this would mean jail time if she contacted any of us again. She said the prosecutor would add this to the charges and it would hurt Grace's chances of avoiding prison. Anna stayed with me that night because she was scared Grace might show up at Mom and Dad's house, even though the restraining order covered all of us. The next morning, I finally made the appointment with the therapist my doctor had recommended weeks ago. I sat in her office trying to explain everything that had happened, and she listened without judgment as I talked about being outed and watching my family explode. She helped me see that Grace using my sexuality as a weapon said nothing about who I was as a person. She gave me breathing exercises for when the anger got too strong, and helped me understand that Grace's cruelty came from her own problems, not anything I'd done wrong. We scheduled weekly sessions, and she said healing would take time, but I'd already shown incredible strength by standing up for the truth. 2 days after that session, Whitney called while I was at work with news from the bank. They'd reviewed all the fraud reports we'd filed and agreed to reverse about 60% of the charges since we'd reported everything so quickly. Dad would get back $24,000 of the $40,000 Grace had stolen, though the rest was considered too old to dispute. Whitney said it was better than most fraud cases she'd handled, and at least we'd recovered something even if the emotional damage would last much longer. Mom called me that afternoon to say she and Dad had started seeing a marriage counselor to deal with everything Grace had put them through. The counselor was helping them understand how Grace had twisted their religious beliefs to hide her crimes and manipulated them against each other. Mom said the counselor pointed out how Grace had used their faith as a shield every time she got in trouble. Dad was learning to forgive himself for not seeing the signs sooner, and Mom was working through her guilt about raising someone capable of such cruelty. They went twice a week, and Mom said it was the first time in months they'd really talked instead of just arguing about whose fault everything was. A week later, Whitney called again, but this time she sounded frustrated. Grace's public defender had contacted her about a possible plea deal, where Grace would admit to fraud and identity theft in exchange for probation and paying us back. The defender said Grace would agree to therapy and staying away from the family, but wanted to avoid jail time because of her mental health struggles that supposedly caused all this. Whitney said we had to decide as a family whether to accept the deal or push for prison time, which could mean a long trial. Logan wanted her in jail, but Mom worried about Grace's future if she had a felony record. Dad said he just wanted this over with so we could move on, and Anna said she'd feel safer knowing Grace couldn't contact us for years. After 3 family meetings and dozens of phone calls, we agreed to the plea deal but with strict conditions. Grace had to pay full restitution even if it took decades and attend mandatory therapy for at least 2 years. She couldn't contact any family member for 5 years and had to do 300 hours of community service. Whitney added that any violation would mean immediate jail time with no second chances. The plea hearing happened 2 weeks later at the courthouse downtown. Grace showed up in a conservative suit trying to look remorseful, but the act fell apart the second she opened her mouth. She told the judge we were persecuting her for being the only moral person in our family and claimed everything was a misunderstanding. The judge saw right through her and said he'd rarely seen someone show less remorse for destroying their family. He accepted the plea deal but added 500 more hours of community service and mandatory financial management classes. Grace's lawyer tried to argue, but the judge said she was lucky to avoid prison and should be grateful for her family's mercy. That night, I was lying in bed when my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. She'd been reading books about LGBTQ people and faith that the marriage counselor had recommended, and wanted me to know she was trying to understand. She said she still had questions and struggles, but I was her daughter, and that would never change. She wrote that seeing Grace's hate had shown her what really damaged a family, and it wasn't who someone loved. It was the first time since everything started that she'd reached out with something other than disappointment or Bible verses. I cried reading her message and texted back that I loved her too. The next week, Anna asked if I'd go with her to talk to our parents about something important. We sat in the living room where that horrible dinner had happened, and Anna took a deep breath before telling them she was gay too. Mom's face went through about 10 different emotions, while Dad just nodded slowly like he'd suspected for a while. Anna held my hand as she explained she'd known for years, but been too scared to say anything after seeing how they'd reacted to me. Mom started crying, but not the angry tears from before, just sad ones about not creating a safe space for her daughters. Dad said Grace's betrayal had taught them that honesty deserved respect, even when it challenged their beliefs. They promised to try to understand and asked Anna to be patient while they learned. Mom hugged us both and said she'd rather have honest daughters than another Grace. 3 weeks after the plea hearing, Logan invited everyone to dinner at his apartment to celebrate his girlfriend's promotion at work. She'd been so helpful during everything with Grace that she felt like family already, and Logan wanted to make it official. We all brought food, and for the first time in months, it felt like a real family dinner, without anger or accusations hanging over everything. Logan raised his glass to toast the truth even when it hurt, and the family bonds that had survived Grace's attempts to destroy them. His girlfriend thanked us for accepting her and said she'd never seen a family fight so hard to stay together through something so awful. We stayed late talking and laughing, and Mom even asked my girlfriend questions about her job without any judgment in her voice. Anna brought her girlfriend too, and nobody made it weird or uncomfortable. Dad said he was proud of his kids for being honest even when it was scary. 3 months went by before the first check from Grace showed up in Dad's mailbox. It was only $200 out of the $40,000 she owed, but Dad stared at it for a long time. He drove to the antique dealer downtown who had one of grandfather's watches and paid $800 to get it back. The dealer remembered buying it from a young woman who said her grandfather died and the family needed money. Dad put the watch in his safe next to the others we'd slowly been finding. My graduation came up faster than expected with finals and everything else going on. The whole family showed up wearing their Sunday best, and Anna had a small rainbow pin on her dress collar. Mom saw it but didn't say anything, just squeezed both our hands when we walked across campus together. She kept taking pictures and telling other parents these were her honest daughters who made her proud. We went to lunch after, and nobody mentioned Grace's empty chair at the table. Detective Groves called me 2 weeks later while I was packing up my dorm room. Grace had gotten arrested in Nevada for trying to open credit cards with fake documents at 3 different banks. The detective said federal charges were coming since she crossed state lines to commit fraud. She'd been using a fake name and had dyed her hair black, but they caught her anyway. Mom and Dad decided to renew their vows on their 25th anniversary 6 months after everything happened. They kept it small with just us kids and Logan's girlfriend at the courthouse. The judge read something about truth and trust being the foundation of marriage. Mom wore her original wedding dress that still fit, and Dad cried during the ceremony. They went to dinner after, and Dad made a toast about learning what really matters in a family. Anna got her acceptance letter to State University the next spring with a full scholarship for her essay about finding courage. She'd written about watching her sister destroy their family with lies while learning to be herself. The scholarship committee said it was the most powerful essay they'd read that year. She moved into the dorms that fall and put up pride flags in her window. Logan planned his proposal for months and finally did it at our 4th of July barbecue in the backyard. He got down on one knee and told his girlfriend she showed him what real loyalty looked like. She said yes immediately, and everyone cheered while Dad grilled burgers and Mom cried happy tears. They set the wedding date for next summer and asked me to be in the wedding party. A thick envelope came from Grace's lawyer 8 months after her arrest with her prisoner number on the return address. I opened it and saw 10 pages of her blaming me for ruining her life and destroying her future. She called me names and said I turned the family against her with my gay agenda. I read the first paragraph, then threw the whole thing in the trash without looking at the rest. 2 years after that terrible Sunday dinner, we all met at Mom and Dad's house for Thanksgiving. The table was smaller without Grace, but felt bigger somehow with everyone being real with each other. Anna brought her girlfriend and nobody acted weird about it. Logan's wife was pregnant and showing everyone ultrasound pictures. Mom made all the same dishes she always made, but this time we actually enjoyed eating them. Dad said grace and thanked God for truth and for the family members who chose honesty over deception. We stayed late playing board games and sharing stories without anyone keeping secrets or planning manipulations. The house felt peaceful in a way it never had when Grace was there lying about everything. We weren't perfect, and Mom still struggled sometimes with having 2 gay daughters, but we were trying. That was more than we ever had before when Grace was poisoning everything with her lies and schemes. All right, thanks for hanging out with me through all of this today, folks. Kinda wild to share all these thoughts with you, and I really appreciate you sticking around till the end. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.